This is Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. I'm glad you are with us today. We are joined by Mark Takano.
Yep.
He is one of the newest members of the United States Congress. Sir, all I can say is congratulations. What a tremendous victory. About 59% of the vote in a district that was seen as a swing district. 59% is not a swing district. That's a romping.
Well, thank you for that. It's your words, and
Right,
I'll accept
yes,
it.
Yes.
I don't want to get ahead of myself with
Fair
the people
enough.
here, but I am gratified and honored that the people of Riverside County have given me this great privilege and honor to represent them.
Well, I must ask you, what went right? Because honestly, not only did you win, but you won by a very significant margin against a fairly popular Riverside County supervisor, a moderate Republican. I mean, he seemed like he was a pretty strong candidate. But if you look at the results, not so much.
Well, I think the election was also an expression of the great changes that have undergone, that Riverside County has undergone, the new people who have moved in, and frankly, for the first time, we've had a district that was drawn by an independent commission. Right. It wasn't subject to political machinations, and I believe this district, the way it's been cut, really represents the interests of this community. And I'll add to that. I think that the national branding for the Republican Party, I think, has gotten pretty unpopular. Especially in California. Yeah, and even someone like John Tavallone, who's a decent public servant.
He's the Riverside County Supervisor.
Riverside County Supervisor. He really could have had a hard case to make before the people that even someone who professed to be a moderate was going to be able to moderate the Republican Party in Washington. 3
Republican incumbents in Congress from California lost.
That's right.
Unexpected. Some Democrats won that were not expected to win.
That's right.
And let's talk about the Republican brand, if I may, in the context of the debate over guns and gun violence.
Yes.
I personally thought that when Gabrielle Giffords had been shot and 6 people killed in Tucson, that would be the beginning of the conversation. It didn't work out that way. What really caused the conversation to begin was the Sandy Hook massacre in Connecticut. Since you've been in Washington, what have you seen and heard as it relates to this gun control, gun rights debate?
Well, what I've seen that was particularly impactful was there was a hearing held by the Democratic caucus. Before that hearing was the superintendent of the Sandy Hook school system, the school system that has Sandy Hook.
In Newtown.
The mother of Gabriel Zimmerman, whose son, a young 22-year-old activist son, was among those killed in the Tucson shooting.
Right, of course.
So we had a mother, we had a superintendent. To hear the superintendent recount just the sheer agony of informing the parents of those school children, those innocent little children who died, and to hear her tell about the heroism of the educators who put their lives on the line to try to protect the children they could. It was heart-wrenching and heartbreaking to hear that, Brad.
But what's interesting is that when you listen to the comments coming from various members during these hearings on gun violence, it really is as if the two sides are just ships passing in the night. I mean, there really does seem to be an increased polarization on the issue of gun rights. You do see some, quote, pro-gun Democrats moving to the, quote, gun control side, but on the Republican side, you're not seeing a lot of wavering.
No, well, there's some indications that on some of the issues we might see movement. I think there's Representative Gingrey of Georgia, I think that's where he's from.
Right.
Expressed some openness. He might have changed his mind, I don't know, but he expressed some openness to the idea that high-capacity magazines need to be regulated.
And as I understand it, in California, the law is that a magazine cannot be sold if it has more than 10 bullets.
That's right.
But nationally, that's not the case. And in Sandy Hook, the magazine had 30 bullets.
That's right.
At the Sikh temple in Milwaukee, it had 100 bullets.
That's right.
And yet I heard Senator John Cornyn speak yesterday and he expressed his disbelief that a magazine limit would matter. I'm not taking a position, I'm just kind of getting a sense of the temperature.
Well, I think there's some openness to, I mean, to hear Representative Gingrich, who I believe that's his name, express some openness publicly, I think is movement. He's one of the most conservative members of the House.
Well, there's no doubt that it's the House where all the action will be.
Yes.
Because I presume that in the Senate, the Democratic majority will be able to get something moving. But again, on the issue of background checks, that seems to cause some consternation.
To me, background checks are just common sense. To keep weapons, period, regardless of whether they're assault weapons or not, to keep weapons, period, out of the hands of mentally ill people seems to me a point upon which, you know, all of us can agree. I don't think I don't have any quarrel with that. Many Americans want weapons to defend themselves.
Right, but let me ask you, because you do come from a semi-rural suburban district. I would presume that in the Inland Empire, there are a lot of folks that are most concerned about Second Amendment rights, and I have to think that you're being lobbied in the in the most traditional sense on the issue.
I believe in the Second Amendment. I'll tell you that. I do think Americans. I do want to protect people's liberties, but like all liberties, even our freedom of speech, it's subject to reasonable restrictions. I mean, Oliver Wendell Holmes, as you're a lawyer, you know, he famously said, "You can't yell fire in a crowded theater." You know, I don't believe the Second Amendment says that everyone should have a tank in their backyard, or a bazooka, or a ground air missile. And I think we can draw the line at military-style assault weapons. You simply don't need those to defend yourself in the home. I realize people who live in rural areas worry about the sheriff being able to get out to them in a timely fashion. But I don't think most Americans really believe that military-style assault weapons are an absolutely necessary and an absolute right.
And polls so indicate. But even Senator Dianne Feinstein from the state of California, who has been the #1 sponsor of restrictions on assault-style weapons, has said it's going to be an uphill battle to get the restriction reinforced. As you know, we had a ban for 10 years.
Reauthorization of that bill, it was never reauthorized. And I want to say that in California, these we have strict laws on the books. We're at the federal level. We're doing nothing more than matching, in many cases, what California has already done and what some states have done. So you know, we do need a national system of background checks so that we keep these weapons, or keep any weapons, out of the hands of mentally ill people. The magazine, the high-capacity magazines. You know, look at the Tucson shooting. They were able to stop the shooter because he had to reload. The fact that he had to reload gave an opportunity.
But think about the fact, if he had a magazine that had 100 bullets, he would have had to reload 3 times later.
You're exactly right. He would have been able to shoot many more people, and so I think it's common sense to limit the size of those magazines. If it was a 10 magazine capacity in Sandy Hook, it would have been less kids that were shot.
In the final analysis, it's going to come down to congressional Republicans, your colleagues on the other side of the aisle in the United States Congress. How do you speak with them when they come from increasingly conservative, polarized districts? If that is your position, that is your goal, that's your desire.
Well, you know, I have great hope that Republicans will look at, I think, the polls, and I respect my Republican colleagues. And I have to tell you that we came together on Hurricane Sandy money.
Ultimately,
we came together on the debt ceiling extension.
Ultimately.
There are signs that the Congress is moving off off these hardened positions.
Okay, his name is Mark Takano. He is a member of the United States Congress. When we come back, we'll be shifting to the First Amendment. We'll be speaking with Mike Gardner, a member of the Riverside City Council, about a cross in the city of Riverside. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on Charter California Edition. Welcome back to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. From the Second Amendment to the First Amendment, we are now joined by Mike Gardner, member of the Riverside City Council. We just spoke with Mark Takano about Second Amendment rights. I want to speak with you about First Amendment rights. As you know, in the United States Constitution, we have a clause which provides freedom of religion, and in some ways freedom from religion, in terms of government interference and government endorsement. Amazing that Riverside has been faced with this issue as it relates to a cross that is on a beautiful mountain known as Mount Rubidoux. Give us a little history about Mount Rubidoux and its cross.
The cross on Mount Rubidoux was originally placed in 1907. The mountain was privately owned at that time, yes, by the owner of Riverside's famous Mission Inn.
Of course.
And he put the cross up in honor of Father Sarah. That cross was replaced in subsequent years several times with more substantial crosses. Right. The original ones were wooden, and for a variety of reasons they didn't survive. A couple actually were vandalized rather substantially. But
and regardless of your faith, it's hard to deny the beauty of the cross, the majesty of its location. It's a sight. Yeah. It's a sight to see.
It is, and particularly with the cross that's there now, which is white, so it does tend to stand out. It's typically not lit at nighttime, so you don't see it then. But in the daytime, it's a little like the big statue of Christ in
Brazil?
Rio.
You're right.
Yeah, it is definitely something that people who grew up in Riverside or have been here for a long time have always had in our city.
But we know, and courts have held time and time again, that a municipality, any form of government, should not endorse a religion. And what that means is they should not own property where a religious symbol sits. And through a series of land transfers, the Mount Rubidoux cross is on land that is owned by the city of Riverside.
That's right. In 1955, the Miller family gave the entire mountain,
right,
cross and all, to the city as a park.
So last year, you received a threat of litigation, claiming that the endorsement, it would be an endorsement in violation of separation of church and state. Very painful, no doubt. I'm not taking a position one way or the other, but ultimately you held a workshop, and I want to hear about that workshop in mid-January, where city council, attorneys, stakeholders came to talk about a resolution on this issue. Tell me about the workshop.
The workshop was focused specifically on the legal issues. We also had two other hearings, but the workshop focused on the legal issues, and we had, I thought, a very good briefing from the city's appellate counsel, who's from Los Angeles, and has argued successfully I think 7 times before the United States Supreme Court.
I see. Not on this issue.
Not on this issue,
right.
But cases before the Supreme Court.
And I believe his position was this would be very tough for Riverside to defend in a court of law.
It was. I think the universal thinking of attorneys is that the case would probably be lost at the trial court. It would then go to the Ninth Circuit Court, where even an en banc hearing, it's more justices.
The entire panel.
You would likely lose. It's not clear whether it would go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has not taken a case specifically on a religious symbol, and they might not.
In quite some time. And so, on the flip side, though, there were constituencies who argued we should fight it anyway. Let's fight. This is our cross. It's a symbol of Riverside. It's not a religious symbol. Let's fight.
There were those, and there were those who argued that you ought to fight on religious grounds, that the government really has no business to tell you what religious symbol you can put on your own government property.
A little complicated.
It is.
Complicated.
But there were those who made that argument as well.
The challenge with that argument is, I'm sure this appellate lawyer makes quite a lot of money per hour, and so during fiscally challenging times, query whether we want to be spending legal fees and hundreds of dollars per hour.
The guess was that it would cost on the order of $500,000 per side to get to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the prevailing party collects their attorney's fees from the losing party.
In this type of case,
in this type
because
of
it's not
case.
automatic.
Right, in this type of case. So
could be $1 million to the city.
Easily, and then if it went on to the Supreme Court, more.
And what's the city budget about?
The city budget is, the general fund budget is about $225 million. So
$1 million is a lot of money.
It is.
I mean, it's a significant, you know, it's not chump change.
If we were to spend those dollars, we would have to not provide some other city
library
service.
services,
Libraries, parks, street sweeping, something.
So ultimately, the city council came to a decision a week later. What was that decision, sir?
The decision was to sell the cross and approximately half an acre lying below it to the highest bidder, regardless of what it is they will do with the cross.
And that's interesting because we're about to speak with Nancy Hart, and I will ask her this question. Can you, and Nancy Hart, of course, a member of the Riverside City Council,
right.
Can you require the owner to keep the cross?
The city cannot. That right. was tried in other cases, actually in California.
I think San Diego.
Yes.
I think.
And the courts held that that was a sham sale. If you're going right. to divest yourself of the religious symbol, it has to be an arm's length sale regardless of what the high bidder will do.
So as we speak today, I understand the plan will be to put that almost half-acre piece of land up for public auction.
Yes.
How's that going to work? It's going to be
there'll be an actual
really?
auctioneer.
Okay.
Hopefully one that we can understand.
I was going to say right.
But it will be totally public, and that's the advantage to the public auction over a sealed bid in my mind.
Okay.
So that, and whoever the high bidder is, whether it's a group of people and entities or an individual that is the high bidder, they will then get the property.
So do you have a sense as to who is planning on making bids? I know there's a few organizations, a coalition, Friends of Mount Rubidoux, the Riverside Land Conservancy, the Mission Inn Foundation and Museum. They obviously
they have formed interest. A group that they call Totally Mount Rubidoux.
Okay.
And the reason for forming that group is to compete to acquire the land and the cross, and their stated intent would be to maintain things as they are. Whoever buys the property will be required to continue to provide public access.
I see.
As it exists today.
You can require that?
Yes. That will be a deed restriction,
okay.
A covenant on the deed. What happens to the cross itself will be up to
right.
the future owner.
Can you require that they keep the property free from vandalism?
Yes, I mean, all that is in there. They have to keep it free of trash and debris and graffiti.
So you've been involved in this process from the beginning.
I have. It lies in the ward I represent.
Oh,
so I may be the council member closest to
clearly.
The issue.
And so it had to have been a tough few months on this issue.
It was.
And so talk to me about that. Were you getting a lot of hate mail, love letters? What were your constituents saying?
People feel very strongly about it. And the first reaction, even my first reaction was, what are these yahoos from the other coast doing telling us what to do in Riverside? They've never been here.
Of course.
They haven't seen it. They don't know anything about the history.
Right.
But once you get beyond that and you recognize that they have a valid argument, the way the courts have ruled, then you have to think a little more seriously about the pros and cons of ways of dealing with that. And
it's interesting because I grew up in the Southern California area, and if you would have asked me 20 years ago, what do you think Riverside would do on this? Oh, they'll fight. This is Riverside, conservative, Bible Belt Riverside. And it's interesting that Riverside has, I guess I'll use the term, grown up in a certain way, and it's not that Riverside is less faithful in terms of its devotion, but you got to look at the law. And
I think the law really is what controls in this case, and when you think about it, whether you like it or not, you really have no choice.
And so are your constituents understanding that, those that wanted the city to defend?
Some are, some are not, but the consul's feeling was there are only two ways we can permanently deal with the constitutional challenge. The consul could take down the cross, which we're not about to do.
Right.
Or we can divest ourselves of the cross and the property it sits on.
Okay, his name is Mike Gardner, member of the Riverside City Council. When we come back, we'll hear from another member of that council. Her name is Nancy Hart. We'll get her take on the Mount Rubidoux cross. My name is Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on Charter California Edition. Welcome back to Charter California Edition. Our guest, Nancy Hart, also a member of the Riverside City Council. And Nancy, we just spoke with one of your colleagues, Mike Gardner, also on the Riverside City Council, about a controversy surrounding the cross on Mount Rubidoux. Wow, who would have thunk that we'd have yet another controversy dealing with religious symbols, but we did. And as we mentioned with Councilman Gardner, the city has decided to hold a public auction to auction off a small piece of land, 0.43 acres, where the cross is, and then the new owner can decide what to do with the cross. What do you think about the decision? I know that you voted for that decision to hold a public auction. Some felt that you should have fought the lawsuit and you shouldn't have backed down.
Well, it's very easy to stand out in the community and say, let's go for it.
Right.
And some of us as council probably would not have minded that. However, there's no guarantee that you will win, and then you're back at square one.
And lawyers are expensive. I know, I used to be one.
Hello.
Yes.
And lawyers are expensive, but also you can't guarantee, and you can't guarantee who will, what they'll do when if they prevail. The courts have not been kind. The lower courts have not been kind. And so you really...
On this issue.
On this issue.
I mean, the courts have been pretty clear that a city should not own land where there is a religious symbol.
So you can fight, but to fight when you know you're going to lose is a really kind of a dumb fight to pick, I think.
And so there will be a public auction. Do we have a sense as to who will be bidding at this stage?
Well, anybody can,
of course,
bid. We have a coalition of groups, the Land Conservancy, the Mission Inn Foundation, and Friends of Mount Rubidoux. And they are hoping that people in the community, even children who might donate $1, might empty their piggy bank, might say, I own a piece of the rock, our piece of our rock. And so I think that that's kind of a good feeling.
Right.
I think when you're a school child and you're in a group of your own peers, you say it. But it's when you look back.
Right.
It's when you look back.
Do you have a sense as to the value that we placed on that?
Well, I think the minimum bid is $10,000.
Okay. Which is a nice chunk of change, but it's not $1 million.
No. It's fairly easy to raise.
Right.
And one person could bid that much. You know, we have wealth in our city. And one person could do it and make a guarantee. And the reason we chose to go open bid or open auction was so people could stand around and watch. You could tape it. You could have a sense that this is my stuff,
now,
this is mine.
And the city cannot require the new owner to keep the cross. Is that correct?
That's right.
Right, and that's the key.
There's a risk everywhere on all of it.
Right, but given that the owner would be buying 0.43 acres.
Just the land under the cross. They need to put a fence around it, and they need to leave it open every day for the community to still go there, and because it's open space.
Of course.
And they need to keep it graffiti free and so on.
How do you feel about this? Do you feel good? Do you feel as if...
I feel that we made the best decision we could. We were sort of hamstrung. And when you're an official, the courts require that you stay out of it and stay neutral.
Right, which I understand. Okay, I want to shift gears, if I may, and speak with you about your city council. As you know, a sitting member, Rusty Bailey, was elected to mayor. He was elected in the middle of his second term. That created a vacancy. I've spoken with many council members from various cities, and it's not automatic that there will be an election to fill out the remainder of a term. In some cities, there is an appointment process, and that person appointed fills out the remainder of the term and then runs when that seat is open. In Riverside's case, that would mean that if there was an appointment, that person would serve until 2015 because Mr. Bailey's seat is up in 2015. Riverside takes a different path.
You bestow incumbency on someone you appoint. And we feel that that is not, when you have 2 years left, That's a long enough term.
yes.
A lot of terms are 2 years
Right.
in a lot of elections.
Yes.
And so 2 years is like a short term. And when I was on the school board, I ran for a 2-year term.
Right.
First.
To fill a vacancy.
Yes. And so it, to me, makes good sense. And I think that you allow all of the new people that are coming in, that are running for election, the work of running for election
Right.
tells you a lot about a person.
Especially in a city like Riverside where you can walk, you can get on the phone. I mean,
You can tell by the mailers that they put out.
Right.
You can tell whether whether they use people that are hateful in their mail, in hate speech, in digging in the dirt. And do you want that kind of person? I prefer not to have that
Right.
kind of person.
So in this instance, the city council has appointed someone to fill a short window because
6 months.
right, there will be an election in June.
Yes.
And that person will need to get 50% plus one, or they will go to a
Right.
runoff in
Right.
November. Is that
Right.
correct? So is there a guarantee that the person that you appointed, the council appointed, will not run?
There's no guarantee,
Right.
but he's given his word, and we trust him, and he really doesn't want the seat
Right.
permanently. He's a retired gentleman. But the reason we appointed him, too, was he's a planner.
His name is?
Ken Gutierrez.
Okay.
He was our planning director. We know what he knows.
Right.
He did not have to do study
Right,
on that
of
kind
course.
of thing. But he says now that, wow, I didn't realize all the work that council people do.
So it's interesting you mentioned that because I have had the honor of moderating some of the city council debates amongst candidates and mayoral debates. And one question I have brought up in the past is, the Riverside is a big city. I mean, it's one of the bigger cities in the state.
Yes, it is.
There's a lot going on in Riverside, and the Riverside City Council is essentially a part-time position, at least in pay, but not in dedication. And I can ask you because you're outgoing. You've chosen not to run for re-election, which causes tremendous sadness amongst me and many other people.
Thank
But
you.
be that as it may, I mean, is it time for us to start looking at whether a city the size and magnitude of Riverside should pay its city council members full-time salaries? I mean, your ledge aides get full-time salaries.
Your ledge aide makes more than we do.
Right.
My feeling is that you can't legislate what a person is going to do in office.
Right.
You can only legislate the terms of the
course.
job, and elected officials have a broad array of what they do when they get done.
Right.
And so for the council I have now, I wouldn't at all mind a full-time job. However,
Be careful what you wish for. Right.
yeah. However, I think if you get paid a full-time salary, you shouldn't have an aide.
Oh, really? Well,
If-
that's interesting.
If you're going to do it full-time, do it full-time. Take the pay that goes with it and all the bennies that go with it, and do the job.
That's
Don't
interesting.
legislate it to someone else.
So are there any rumblings on this front? I mean, I was hopeful that as a result of my superiorly informed question, that would get people talking about full-time status.
Well, we've talked about full-time status before, and the reason that we got the last pay raise we got was because the committee that was formed to discuss pay raises chose to give the mayor at that time
Right.
a large raise.
Right.
Chose to give the council not a penny.
Oh, my.
And we got a little miffed
Right.
because we work hard
Yes.
and we weren't going to get that much more, but we got a little miffed as a group.
Right.
And so that was the reason that the large raise came when it did, as a little bit of, a little bit of saying, hey, wait a minute.
What about us?
We work hard
Yeah.
and we deserve a certain amount, maybe not 100,000, 200,000, but we still deserved a raise.
To be continued. Her name is Nancy Hart, member of the Riverside City Council. My name is Brad Pomerance. We thank you so much for watching Charter California Edition.